All right, and all right, we're going. This is a little in media res. Hopefully this works. I always say that because in the past we've had bad stuff going, but this is the intro. What's up, Nick? How are you doing?
I'm loving it. I'm having a great day. I'm coming to you from a Jeep with no roof and no trunk in my uncle's garage in the best state in the country, New Jersey. Love
Well,
New Jersey.
yeah, we'll show you off eventually. I
Yeah,
hopefully right now the only thing we're seeing is my screen.
yeah. We'll
Got
see how
the
that goes. But either way, this is an exciting day. It's going to be a good podcast. Thank you all for listening and joining in.
Yeah, thank everybody. So here's what we're doing today. I'll give you guys the agenda. We're going to talk about what's been going on with the videos as of recent. And then after that, we're going to talk about introducing a mailbag, which we think is a good idea because we understand that we have this small audience, but this audience is very engaged with us, and we appreciate that. And due to that, we want to talk about that and we want to have your guys' opinions included. And if you guys have questions or concerns or anything, we want to talk about it. Right, Nick?
Absolutely. Yeah. So we got, I believe one of our listeners commented on our last episode, but just privately, I get a lot of messages, text messages, and phone calls from you guys. So we thought, why not maybe get some consolidated opinions and we can make this part of the show? I think it's a great addition.
Yes. And I enjoy the comments. I enjoyed the comment on the YouTube page. I thought it was a fair question. And I thought I personally gave a pretty good response. But obviously, I'm biased there.
Yeah.
So moving forward, I guess I wanted to talk. Nick wanted me to talk. This video is going to be public. It's not going to be unlisted. So I've been making the videos for a bit now, unlisted. I don't have to get into why we were doing that, but what's important is that these past videos are going to be made public, and this video is going to be public. And so I know that people haven't loved the unlisted part of the videos, and so that was because of me, and I'm sure the people listening know that. And so this one, and I'm gonna make the other ones public, since you guys want that so badly.
Give the people what they want, right, Thomas?
That's what we're trying to do here, I guess. So
Yeah.
into today, what we're gonna do on my screen, hopefully people can see the about the political compass stuff showing up.
Mhm.
And what we're doing with that is we thought it would be fun to kind of place all of the presidential candidates and the VPs, as well as a few international figures, I think, to kind of scale it
Mhm.
on the political compass. So we're going to do that. I wanted to start with talking about I think we're going to end up straying from what the actual questions on the political compass are and use sort of our own format because we were talking before the recording about how the political compass asks really bad questions. I think they're pretty poorly worded. And I mean, you can speak on this, Nick, if you want to talk
Yeah.
about it for
I
a
mean,
minute.
I'm a stats guy. I love stats. And a huge part of statistics and forming a survey is creating unbiased questions that don't lead the recipient or lead the participant in a certain direction. The compass, I think the compass tries to not lead. It tries not to do that. But the problem is number one, as you mentioned, it doesn't give you the option to say no opinion. And no opinion is an important part of a survey because personally, I think it's kind of lame to answer no opinion. However, no opinion is an important option if if the participant thinks the question is bad. So if you think something's a bad question and you don't want to be tracked either way, you can say, I have no opinion. But what happens when you have four questions and no ability to give a no opinion answer? Then you find yourself kind of forced to play into perhaps a leading question or a question that lacks context, things along those lines. I also don't enjoy the topics. For example, I believe there's 6 pages, and one entire page is on religion, and another entire page is on like sex. Personally, I don't think sex is really that important. to take up a sixth of a political quiz. Like there should be other topics that are emphasized. Like for example, in today's political environment, immigration and border control and security is such an important topic. But there's not even a single, mine at least, didn't have a single question on immigrants. The only question
There
was
is a
like, can
question
immigrants,
on integration.
it was like, can they assimilate? But you see, here's the thing. Even people today who are against immigration aren't going to sit here and be like, they can't assimilate. Like, that's not really the point of contention. So I think that's just
Well,
another
that's not
good
the
example.
point of it's not the point of contention in the United States, maybe. But I do believe. I mean, what are we seeing with the United Kingdom? I do think that is a point of
Sure,
contention.
sure.
But
But I think
I
that they should know their audience. So if they should maybe alter the quiz depending on the country you're in. I think you and I'm just trying to get at the point where I could, I don't want to be one of those guys, but I'm going to say it. I could definitely do it better for sure.
I think the issue is like questions will come across that's about what somebody personally desires, even though
Mhm.
that the whole point of the scale is about talking about actions of the state or so if you're authoritarian, it's about what the state restricts. And if you're libertarian, it's about being in favor of the state not restricting things. But then it
Mm.
asks a question like I think about
Oh, great point.
preferring if your kids go to a religious school or if there are religious values taught at the school you send your kid to. Now, if you think about the question, it doesn't specify if it's a public school or if it's a private school. And
Hmm.
it honestly it creates the idea that the person making the choice is, well, it's like, well, I personally believe that. And if somebody's
That's a good
personally
point.
religious but is not politically religious, it's a distinction that the compass is meant to cover, but it actually fails in doing so.
You're
And
right.
so I think
The quiz unfairly or incorrectly assumes that what someone prefers in their own life is what they want the government to enforce. Such a great point.
yes. So it,
Which leaves very little, which it leaves very little room for someone to be, well, no, let me say it this way. It leaves little room for people to be construed as authoritarian because all the questions are about what you personally prefer. But the root of authoritarianism is what the government enforces. So it's almost like, I mean, this may not be true, but I felt like as I was answering, I was trying to think about, okay, well, if I answer X, Y, or Z way, what's going to happen to the compass? I didn't let that influence my answers, but I was just curious as someone taking it. I felt like it was very difficult to be classified as authoritarian. That's just how I felt as a person taking the quiz.
I mean, I understand that. I also think in some regards, for instance, one of the questions is about art
Mm, yep.
and talking about abstract art. I do not understand how that factors in to
That shouldn't even be a
being
question. Yep, you're absolutely right.
economic left, economic right, or authoritarian or libertarian, because the idea libertarianism is almost about indifference or
Hmm.
the right to indifference, whereas authoritarianism is about promoting an ethical or moral attitude through a social structure or through a political structure. And so when you present that question, I understand the idea that it is trying to get at and that it is attempting to deconstruct, but it doesn't functionally work because my understanding would be if you click that abstract art is meaningless, that's an authoritarian idea, but
Hmm.
that doesn't make any sense.
I agree. Out of I think there's 30 questions that are asked, five on each page, I think, on six
No,
pages.
it's 60 questions.
Excuse me. So it's 10 on each page. Okay,
No,
so
no,
out of
but
the 60,
it's not 10 on each page though. So the
oh,
sex
some
art
pages were longer than
category I
others.
think only has 5.
Okay, well, you know what? Also, I'd highly recommend that you guys go to this website and take it yourself. It took me like 5 or 6 minutes to take, so it's super quick. But I think, yeah, you and I both expressed the quiz itself isn't that great. However, we're still going to play into it, and we're going to put some people on this compass. Let's jump
Yeah.
in.
So like first, for example, we'll show you the nations. And so then it
Hmm.
becomes difficult because Singapore is rated as very economically right and very authoritarian.
Yep.
And I agree with it being authoritarian and I agree with it being economically right in some regard. But then there's a lot of regards where there's a lot of state control and state decision making. And so how do you weigh those balances? I mean, I guess if you could
Mm.
choose this for you. So I'm going to scroll down and show you guys uh, my political compass. And I don't exactly agree with it. I think that I agree with the libertarian aspect. I think the economics comes down to me having a lot of questions about which policies work best. And I think on this, when I took it this time, it made me lean a bit left. And if I took it on another day, I might lean a bit right. But a lot of
Mm,
that comes down to how I interpret these questions and how I feel personally in a moment, which can change. And I admit that. So I don't think this is an unfair assessment of myself. I think it depends on the day for me. And I've told Nick this. I'm a bit of an ideological mess in some regard. I believe in economics is where I'm likely most in ideological mess. So it makes sense that I would end up on this region, especially because I believe I have some economic opinions that are very right and some economic
mm.
opinions that are very left. And so what it creates is this sort of radical centrism. Yes, radical. It
Nice.
makes
Good
me
term.
a radical centric in an economic term. Whereas when it comes to authoritarian or libertarian, I'm much more decidedly against authoritarianism, I guess, or
Yeah,
I'm, so it
absolutely.
does work. And this gives you language to be able to talk about your politics, even if it's not incredibly accurate. So
Well said.
I have my mouse on the screen. Hopefully it can show that. I want you to tell me where you land and I'm going to annotate it on the page.
Well, first, I want you to guess where I'm at. That's more fun. And you guys listening too, you guys can make your own mental guess.
Okay, if I'm going to guess where you're at, I'm going to say there's no way you're economic left.
Okay.
And there's no way you're super authoritarian, but I think you might have some because you believe in personal freedoms, but you're also uh, populist in some regard and to how you view the state and how you view the state as a tool to, I guess, expand upon people. I'm going to put you like right here. Can you see this, Nick?
I do. I do see it. Yeah,
All
right
right.
there.
Okay, and then I want you to tell me up, down, left, right, where you actually are.
Okay, so I was very surprised where I got put. I am green. I'm in the green box.
Okay.
-2, -2 is my coordinate.
Okay. So you're right here.
Oh, well, yep, there you go. Yeah. I mean, technically it's -1.5, -1.79, but that doesn't really matter. That's close enough.
Interesting. So we're
So
not
I was super
we're pretty
surprised.
similar.
Yeah, but you see the thing is, it's like I know I'm economic right. So like
Questions are really bad for the economics too. And
yeah,
we spent most of the time trashing the social stuff. I'm pretty sure reading about how the scoring goes into it. Some of the economic stuff comes down to uh some of the economic stuff comes down to weird policies that we could argue are actually social and not economic.
or maybe I'm not economic right and I just want to be. Who knows? But either way, you and I are pretty similar. Maybe in fact this rating is accurate for me, and maybe it's just like the more time I spend around you, the more time you spend around me, the more similar we become. That does happen with people. So
It can happen. So I'm
yeah,
gonna
but
go
either
back to
way,
clicking.
I'm curious to see what you guys thought of where you think I landed. I'm sure that many of you will be surprised and perhaps even disgusted.
All
All
right,
right,
so
so now let's put
let's
Trump on this
move it.
thing. Yeah.
Let's move. And at the end of this, so to be clear, hopefully you guys can see the new thing, right? You can see it,
Yep,
Nick.
we got it.
Right, perfect. So hopefully what comes of this is, sorry, I'm getting way ahead of myself here.
Sure, sure, sure.
Uh, on the Political Compass page, they actually have a 2024 president and vice president
Mm,
political compass that shows the positions that they believe them to be in. And I'll show the audience and I'll show you, Nick, that after we do our own, if that works with you.
that's awesome. Love it.
So
Okay.
let's start. I guess I don't know if we described what we're doing. We're gonna start with Trump. Nick, tell me how you feel about where he should go and why.
Okay. So right off the bat, Trump in my mind is authoritarian right. So I say right. I feel like on economics, it's pretty obvious. I mean, yeah, he prints money. Yeah, he does government spending, but at this point, that's so ubiquitous that I don't even think it could be taken into consideration, really. Um, he he's definitely closer to the center, though. So
Mm.
I think his economics aren't that far right. So I'd probably drag him left more. Yes, but I do think he is authoritarian. You know, the election stuff, election denialism, um, controlling people, contorting his entire party, um, his his kind of brazenness with the law. And when I say that, I mean he comes off to me as a person who enforces rules upon others but doesn't follow them himself, which in my mind is like the ultimate authoritarian.
And also
So,
the reason that he might not end up breaking that many laws, but I agree that the reason he ends up being more authoritarian is because he would break those laws or be more authoritarian if he could, if he
mm,
didn't have these stopgaps in place.
yeah,
And I
dude,
mean,
like,
that's our assumption about him. I think this is another difficult thing. So, like when we talk about US presidents, essentially all of them are always going to be an authoritarian, right? Because of the
good point.
structure of our government is pretty limiting. We're going to talk about this later, is pretty limiting to what you can and cannot do. And
Mm,
it's the US is a capitalist, it's a market economy. And so that puts it towards the right. And in addition to that, the political leaders, if you're in the executive, you're the commander in chief, you make these decisions on policy, it's going to be authoritarian because you're using your authority. For you to be a libertarian president, you'd actually just have to choose not to do things, or to the things that you're doing
right.
would be the removal of stuff. And so in some regards, Trump removed restrictions for fossil fuels, for fracking, for natural gas, for pollution. You could look at
True.
those to be libertarian things in a sense because it's taking control away from the government and giving it on to business. But I agree that I think a lot of his personal desire is to use the government to his advantage. And I don't know, like, not
Well,
to
that's
make
why I
himself
think
wealthy.
if we were to maybe even tailor this a little more, I think you should keep his y-axis the same, but move him slightly right on the x-axis. Because after you just said a few of those items regarding like deregulation, I now feel that that's a good point. I think he's a little more right. Yeah, that could be good. Like that's good. Yeah, that's good too.
And it's
Um,
also hard because part of his presidency was not
COVID.
was during COVID, and so then everything, like, I mean, do you want to grade that on a curve? I mean, are we comparing him to Sweden? And it's hard to look at that because I guess the way he looked at COVID was sort of economic, right? Because in
Mm,
comparison to somebody like Biden's group, who I believe produced more money than what Trump did, but he also printed a lot, helped in the printing of a lot of money or supported that policy, which is it's
mm.
hard to look at COVID. It's hard to grade that.
I agree that it's hard to grade COVID. I think he did take a libertarian approach on COVID. People always blame him for the lockdowns, or some people are starting to, but he didn't actually do that. That was the states under him. So I don't put that on him. I mean,
Yeah, when we
he
get to
had some
DeSantis,
right. And I would also like to point out, now that I'm thinking about it, there are people. So we earlier, you just made a comment. You said, are we comparing him to other countries? I think the correct answer for us going forward is we should compare Trump to the other people that we have listed as options. So now I'm looking at this list, and now I'm thinking we have to move Trump lower on the y-axis because there are many people I see here that are more authoritarian than Trump.
interesting. I think that's fair because I don't want to. I'm not going to spoil anything, but I agree with
Mhm.
you. I would move him probably in this range. And now, if we were, and this is in compare,
That's
this is
good.
all relative
Yeah,
to the other people. If this
exactly.
was every person on Earth, or if it was every leader, I think if my mouse is visible, he would end up closer towards the upper right and the farther right.
Yes, I agree. If the sample size was larger. But
Yes.
you know, in this concentrated group of already authoritarian people, like you know, he actually I think he comes out as one of the least authoritarian figures, and maybe that's why he has like a nice following, among other reasons, is because people see him as like a freedom loving guy. I don't think he is, but in comparison, yeah, I can see it.
And mind you, we're using our own rules. So we aren't
Yeah, of course
taking
we are.
into account how he feels about abstract art. And I think
Exactly.
part of what this political compass, I believe, is designed to do is actually to look at world leaders. And I think they need a justification to put somebody like Kamala into the green because, like, well, it's like this is what Kamala Harris would believe about art and about
Mm,
immigrants in this regard. So we're moving on to Kamala. When you
yeah.
look at her policy, though, I don't think she's still authoritarian.
Hell yeah.
So I mean, now so like when we look at something, it's also hard when you look at something like so price controls are in the news. Though I believe
Mhm.
she used the term price gouging and to prevent price gouging. Now that's an economic policy, but it's one with authoritarian or libertarian. It has social connotation or it denotes social issues with it.
Right.
So this is a kind of an issue with it where it's it sounds like a purely economic decision, but it also contains stuff that's social within it.
Okay, so where are you putting let's like start the conversation with where you think she goes.
I think let's start here and then talk.
You know what? You know what's funny? That's exactly where I would put her.
Okay.
So like she is authority, like we totally agree on this 100%. So a big problem I think with this presidential election is the two candidates are actually too similar. And it's kind of annoying because like everyone's walking around, all of you guys that listen, you're calling me, you're telling me just how different they are and how great Trump is or how great Kamala is. But the truth of the matter
None of
is
your friends are
they're
telling you how great Kamala is. Come on, be
I've got
honest.
two. I've got two
Oh, never
friends.
mind. I take it back.
It's a small number. You're absolutely right. So and maybe that's also why psychologically I want to think I'm in the purple box because so many of my friends are. But either way, I think Kamala and Trump are really well placed here, especially in comparison. Kamala is less authoritarian than Trump. She's done some authoritarian things. In fact, she's done something that's authoritarian that I think many of my right-wing friends would agree with, which is she like kind of kept people in prison. She over penalized criminals and like basically extended their sentences by hiding evidence or keeping their court dates and basically had them continue to do cheap labor. I mean, that's all over the
Yes,
news.
I know. We
So
said
people, what's up?
I know I know we said that we aren't we're, we're looking at this in our own way and we're not necessarily using the questions from the compass, but like a question on the compass was talking about criminal reform and punishment.
Mm,
And I mean, she might have personal beliefs on if there should be reform and whatnot, but if you look at her record, it is not one of political reform
no way.
or of not political reform. I apologize for that misspeak of personal reform through prison. She's a punishment person. Look at what
Yes.
she did with marijuana and also I don't even with the amount of disinformation on the whole border czar claim. If you do look at if it is to be believed that she had an involvement in the border under the Biden admin, it leans authoritarian.
Of course it does.
Yeah,
I mean, at the end of the
we can
day,
agree on it.
she's a government official, and think about just how conniving she is, right? Like in the primary, she trashes Biden. Her her political support just withers away. All her donors vanish after Tulsi Gabbard destroys her in the debate. But guess what? She still comes back for another piece. She takes the VP slot because Biden was looking for a diversity pick. I do not think Kamala is a diversity pick at this current moment as running for president, but I think she was a diversity pick when she was chosen as VP. I think there were different motives involved. I think now she's running for president simply because she can inherit all of Biden's money and she has some political prestige. And a third important point is other big players like Gavin Newsom, for example, that I think would be more popular than her. Gavin wants to sit back because he doesn't want to risk losing to Trump. So yeah.
Yeah,
Either way, I think
I'd
Kamala's
actually
well placed.
I'd push back a little on Gavin Newsom's popularity on a nationwide level because I feel like he gets so much bad press and that people. So one
True.
thing is Elon Musk, who apparently is uh, the the fans of this podcast's favorite person. I'm
People
joking.
love Elon Musk. People were very upset with me and with us about what we said about Elon Musk. So
we're gonna
Yeah.
keep at it. I mean, he's been posting a lot of content, quote unquote, on X about how Kamala is a communist. And
Ridiculous.
Newsom is not a communist. Kamala is not a communist. But if one had to be, Newsom there's a better argument, even though there isn't really an argument, is my point. He
Hmm.
gets a lot. I mean, we'll show it later when we place him. We'll talk about him when we get to him. And I think we can move on now to JD Vance, unless if you
Yeah.
have any final words about Kamala.
Well, yeah, I just think another thing about Kamala, and like this kind of just shows by how short our conversation was on her. She's kind of just boring. Like she's just kind of boring to talk about. Like
Well, I
she's
mean,
not.
there's no
She's not.
policy. She's not running on
She has
policy,
no policies that she's kind of announced. She did announce this whole tax cut thing on tips, but she just stole that from Trump. Um,
which
she, you know,
sidebar, how do you feel about that?
I think it's Weasley, but I support the policy. So fine, if both contenders for president are saying they're going to do something, I feel like that increases the odds it'll happen. So let's make it happen. Let's see it happen. So how do I feel about it? I think it's kind of lame and kind of cringe, and I think voters will see it. But once again, it's a policy I support. So
It
fine.
economically doesn't make a lot of sense from a perspective of talking about taxation, in my opinion.
And is that because most tipped workers don't even report their tips?
Not even that. I mean, that is true, but I think so if somebody works a job where they get paid $50,000 a year on
Mm-hmm.
salary, and somebody works a job where they get paid $50,000 a year on salary and tips, is it necessarily fair that the person who doesn't have the opportunity to make tips has to give more of his income that's taxed? I mean, that's a wider debate. I mean, we have a tipping problem in the U.S. in the sense that companies are allowed to subsidize their workers, not even subsidize, they're allowed to pay them less and then put more of the payment on the consumer through tipping.
Well, here's what I'll say. I think that there's been a debate, a huge debate, about whether tipped employees should actually receive the minimum wage. I don't know the exact specifics, but the federal minimum wage is 7.25. I think that's still accurate. I don't think they've raised it. And like the tipping minimum wage is like 2.50 an hour. I think that's accurate. I might be wrong, plus or minus $1, whatever. My point is, the argument has always been, well, they make tips, so with their tips, they get up to or maybe even exceed the minimum wage. I think that's kind of a bad argument. It's kind of
It is. It's a
disingenuous.
bad argument.
What if you have a slow shift? What if you don't get booked as many hours? Like you get like there's so many problems with that argument. But rather than raising the tipped minimum wage, they an alternative solution would just be to not tax tips. Because if I'm making 2.50 an hour and with my tips I'm making 5 an hour, for example, and you're making 7.25 an hour, well, after taxes, if I pay no taxes and you do, our income will actually be the same. And that's like one avenue to go about it. So I think that rather than the government addressing the underlying issue, which is tipping culture is super toxic to the American economy, in my
They just put a
opinion,
band-aid on it.
they just put a band-aid on it and it like in their mind it's like a tax remedy. So like once again, I support the measure as a step in the right direction, but I think the best step forward would just be kind of eliminate tipping. But I also understand it's so culturally ingrained and it's like some people are just never going to get away from the argument of, oh well, good service should be rewarded. And like I agree with that argument, but you can reward good service in other ways. Like for example, if you do good service, your boss can just give you a raise. And second, if you do poor service, you could be laid off. Like I do good at my job. I'm not given like I don't get tips. Like I got like you get promoted or you get a raise. Like so just the idea that like good work is only rewarded through tips is kind of silly. So I don't think that argument's great either,
Maybe
but
the
either
solution
way.
would be to switch to a commission style strategy for the service industry.
I don't like that either because you're gonna have the start. Well, first off, all the menu items are gonna get more expensive, and all of a sudden the waitresses are gonna be pushing the most expensive items onto you. So please no, I think it's actually worse.
But they already do that because they get a percentage. They already push those
I know
items.
because their tip is proportional with the bill, but like this would be even more egregious, bro. Like because the price of everything would go up. Like even my sweet tea would be like $4 instead of 2.50. Like everything would go up.
Yeah, I guess so. You're right. That was a half-baked idea that I threw out there.
No, no, it's fine. No, I'm not. And I
All
and
right,
I like the idea on the surface. I always appreciate a nice half-baked idea. That's what most of my stuff is. So
good.
you can even
This is
argue my
such a
brain is
half-baked
half-baked.
podcast. Jeez.
Yeah. All right. Next
When
up
I
is
sit down and
Vance.
try to think about policy,
I've absolutely. Say that again.
nothing. I was just saying that when I actually sit down and try to think about things like policy, I realize how shallow of an understanding I have, which makes this whole exercise to me even more humorous. But that being said, we're on to
Yeah.
Cincinnati.
I think there's
We're
certain
on to
policy
JD
topics.
Vance.
Just right. Certain policy topics I know a lot about, and there's some I know absolutely nothing about. Close friend of mine basically taught me recently that like wind energy is a complete scam. For example, like I didn't know anything about it. Either way, Vance has to be economic right, more authoritarian than Trump. Like
I
in
agree.
comparison to, yeah, I mean, yeah, up there,
Wait, I
where your
actually
cursor
think
is.
he's not much more economic, right? Well, I'm trying to think because
You're right, he's not much more.
he is more though in his background in
He is
Silicon
more, but he's
Valley
definitely
and
more
his
authoritarian
Peter
without
Thiel.
a question.
I think he's pretty much like up here. Is it crazy to put him at the very top? Once again,
He's
we can't
super.
put him there because there might be people who end up more up there. But I'm going to put him there.
Yeah,
How do you feel about that?
yeah.
Feel
I
good about
mean,
that?
once again, sounds like you and I both see the list on the left, and we know where this is going. But like Vance is super authoritarian, and that is what makes him.
From an
Vance
American
is so
standard.
authoritarian. Wait, say that again. Sorry.
From an American standard.
Yeah, absolutely. But he's so authoritarian that he's like unpalatable with the American public. Like he's the I saw this recently. He's like the least popular vice president pick in like decades. No one likes him. You know, he has
He's
negative charisma.
anti-populist.
Yeah.
He
He just like Kamala, he has negative charisma,
he's
super boring to
incredibly
listen to.
religious.
Super religious, and that on its
And I don't
face
mean
isn't bad.
privately religious. I mean from a policy perspective, he's religious.
Yeah.
He's
He's
just
like a
not
religious czar.
popular.
Right, exactly. So it's one thing to be religious and to go to church on Sunday, which I think you and I both do pretty regularly, but it's another thing to push that into your politics, break separation of church and state. I mean, this guy wants to ban books, he wants to ban porn, he wants to, oh my God, he had this terrible clip where he like, I forget the exact quote, but he basically said like women should have kids and like not having kids is a bad thing. And like, come on, bro, like that's
Well,
number one, like that's not true, but
a
yeah.
huge misstep he made that we talked about in one of the earlier episodes was how he attacked Kamala Harris as a crazy cat lady and
Mm,
attacked her for not having children,
there you
which is
go.
a pretty regressive viewpoint because one could make the assumption that by him believing that and him making those claims that he is putting value he is creating a value system of women where having kids makes you more valuable.
Right. Yeah,
And
like
I
I
don't think
said,
that's
it's
a
just
leap of thought to
no,
make.
it's not. It's not at all. No, no, no. It's very clear to me just from listening to this guy that I mean, he doesn't only see women as baby making machines, but it is certainly something that like he emphasizes and really cares about. He's super regressive on abortion, like on social policy, which is kind of what this country has become because both parties are super similar economically. On social policy, he's just terrible. Like I mean, I'm gonna say it. I think it's like anti-American, honestly, because like the idea of America is you make your own choices, and by coincidence, no, it wasn't coincidence, but like a lot of the people who immigrate to America or who live in America are actually socially quite similar. I mean, you've always got the loons on the left, right? But a lot of the people are socially quite similar. But I think, but and so it's his views themselves aren't anti-American, like the way he lives his life per se, but it's the fact that he enforces them into law that is. And I really hope that the viewers understand that's not a contradiction. So yeah, he's super authoritarian. There's just no question about it. And that's why he's unpalatable, and he should be. I don't like him.
Yeah, I don't like him very much either. I don't care if he had sexual relations with a couch. That doesn't
Oh my
matter to
gosh, I've heard
me.
about that. That's kind of silly. I mean, I
It doesn't matter. I don't
I
care.
don't even think that's
He can do
true.
whatever he wants to a couch.
Yeah, but also I don't even think it's true.
It
Um,
absolutely is not true.
yeah, right, right, right.
But
So
anyways, let's move on to
okay.
somebody who JD Vance is attacked
Mhm.
semi unsuccessfully, I would
I would just say
say.
unsuccessfully. I would just say I mean, at this point, anyone
I,
who's falling for the stolen valor argument, it's kind of lame. It's a weak argument, anyways, and it's
it's
just
a
because they
weak
need
argument.
something.
It is one of those things where it comes down to technicality, and there's a technical truth to what Vance is saying in some regard. But then it gets into this very wishy-washy territory of pointing at the other person and claiming who was a cooler veteran, like who has like
Oh,
more kills in Call of Duty, where it comes down to it that neither of them saw combat and they both used their military past to give them a political boost.
neither of
And
them saw combat.
yeah,
Both on so
exaggerated a little bit.
exaggerate a little bit, but I want to talk about the rank situation. His rank. I
Mhm.
forget what his rank. We're talking about Waltz, by the way.
Okay, I
So
have this. I have this
Waltz.
mentally locked in if you need help with it.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. So if I slip up, just step in.
Yeah.
Basically, Waltz was gonna get promoted to a rank that I forget the name of. What's the name of it? Do you know
He
that?
was it wasn't that he was going to get promoted. So Walls, I guess. Oh,
Mhm.
we should introduce
No,
him
no,
now.
no. Yeah, yeah.
Right.
There you go. No, do it right now. Do it right now with the T. Do it.
So we've been making joke. Well, Nick doesn't like that his name is
Waltz.
Waltz.
It's
He
spelt wrong
actually has a huge issue with that because he believes that his name should be Waltz.
with a T.
Yes. Now the joke I made is that he should borrow the T from his first name and put it into his last name, so then he could become I'm Waltz.
I'm Waltz. That's funny.
And the
So
idea
yeah,
is
his name is spelled
yeah.
wrong. It shouldn't be Walz. That's not even a real name.
I
He's
mean,
missing
it
a
is, but
T.
whatever.
No,
And
but
the other
it's
thing
not.
funny from this is now he can be like, I'm Waltz, I'm Command
Yeah.
Sergeant Major, I'm Vice President. It fits into this. Uh, my dad said that Kamala is like an avatar presidential candidate in the way that you kind of just fit your idea of her and create that, and that's who she is. And I do believe
Mm.
that extends to Walls a little bit, but now it can be like I'm a combat veteran, or I'm a socialist, I'm a populist. Like he also you can bend around, but let's start moving him around and put him into a sector. I think he is more economic left than Kamala, and he is slightly less authoritarian, but pretty close. And I think there's a big difference to denote with how he's talked about certain things in regards to being libertarian or authoritarian. But I think a major thing we can point back on is COVID and
Mm.
how, relative to other states, his response was more authoritarian.
Yep. Once again,
It's hard in other.
authoritarian without a doubt.
So then I guess actually, you know what? I'm moving him up a bit. Here's what I'm going to do. And you can tell me if you agree or not. I'm going to move Kamala up as well. Because I actually think they're probably, it's weird. They're both authoritarian in different ways, right? Do you agree?
Yeah, it's so strange. They are authoritarian in different ways. But also Kamala, when COVID happened, Kamala was not in a situation
To
to
make
really.
that's so I'm looking. So then we look back at her record as a prosecutor, and so that's why I feel like they wind up in a similar footing.
Mhm.
So
I'm okay
I
with
think
this.
I'm cool with this. This is not an exact science, guys. Believe it or not.
But like without question, Waltz is more economic left and he's
Yes,
authoritarian. Yeah,
he's
like
the most economic left governor or even congressman, like United States politician, a federal politician. There,
mm,
because he's a state politician. I shouldn't say that. No,
whatever.
he's
Yeah.
not. He is a federal politician now, so I can say it. But anyways, he is the most economic left federal politician, excluding Bernie Sanders, I would say, on the
Yep,
national stage.
totally.
So it's easy to put him to left, even if some of his stuff, like socialists, will go, oh, that's not even socialist, like, or whatever. Once again, we have to grade this on a curve. I mean, the lunch program stuff, how he
Yeah.
views the working class, how he views some of those issues, how he talks about them. If you look at the policy surrounding it, it makes him more economic left. Certainly more economic left than Trump and JD Vance. And I would say he is more economic left than Kamala, partially in a sense just because he actually has policies.
Yes. So I think so. I want to also like address something. So I said last episode, I believe, that right now I'm leaning towards voting for Kamala. The reason I'd be voting for Kamala is not because of her. As you can see from where these two like major candidates fall in the compass, they're pretty similar. I don't really like either of them. So I mean, and people always say no one cares who the vice president is, but I think in an example like this, where both actual presidential candidates are kind of poor taste to me, and I don't really prefer one over the other. I dislike them both for different reasons. I kind of just default to the vice presidents, and I think Waltz is significantly better than JD Vance. And JD Vance, I was having a conversation with another friend of mine who was making the case for JD Vance, and I've done a lot of thinking about that conversation. He basically said that, he basically outlined a lot of things Vance believes in, and my friend also believes in those things. I I believe in like maybe 60%. And I sat back and I said, but wait a second, just because I support these things doesn't mean they would be good for the country on a national level. So although I don't like disagree with everything JD Vance says, although he does say some terrible things, I still think I still think he's less palatable and less and not as good for the country as Walt should be. So that's like why I'm leaning towards voting for Kamala at this point. It's just off the VPs, honestly. I think the actual presidential candidates are both they're both dog water. So
And there's something to be said about there's actually a far less of a likelihood that Walz would be president because Kamala's, for a politician, is young and healthy. Whereas
true.
the same issue we had with Biden, I don't think it's unfair to say
It's
that
not
there's a much higher chance that Trump could die,
Trump's
and
going off the
then
rails. Like you can
and then
actually
who
see in
becomes
some of his
president. Also, what are the odds that Trump? So these odds I think are low, and this idea of Trump being this huge danger to democracy or him permanently ending or changing democracy, I don't really follow.
me
But
either.
I do believe he is politically volatile enough to wind up in a position where he could no longer be the president, like through impeachment or through something else. And now the odds of that are not high, but they are higher than Kamala.
Yeah, I mean, look,
Let's
at the
just
end of
make
the
that
day,
clear.
no matter how much you say that Trump is attacked by the system, which I agree, he
Yeah,
is.
I agree too.
Homie's committed like he's a convicted felon. He's
He
committed
probably shouldn't be a
countless
felon.
crimes.
That's fine, regardless.
No, I actually do
He
think
should
he should
probably
be a
be a
felon.
felon for different reasons, is probably the way to word
Okay, yeah, fair, fine. I mean,
it.
what?
That's
Well,
my
he's a
personal
felon.
belief.
Well, he's now a felon because of his business crimes in New York, right? I mean, those are
Yes.
those are legitimate crimes. No, like no,
Well,
he should be a felon for those reasons.
eh,
Like,
he's a felon because, and people might know this. He paid hush money to people, which is legal. The issue is the misdemeanor was how he put it in his books, or how it was put in the books for him,
mm,
and how he tried to make it seem to be, I think, related to campaign funds and whatnot. And I don't know if there's proof that he used campaign funds, but I think what determined it to be a felony is this type of thing becomes a felony if it is to be believed that that decision, that crime was in service of another crime. And what the prosecution said, or the judge noted to the jury, is that the jury does not have to agree on what that crime is, and the jury does not. So the jury doesn't have to know what the crime is. If they believe without a doubt, without a reasonable doubt, that he did it in service of another crime, it doesn't matter what the crime was or if the jury agrees on what the crime was, as long as they believe that it was in service of another crime. That's what bumps
mm.
it up to a felony. And now, I guess, I don't know if that's the way the law is written or if that's what the precedent is there for. I think I lean towards no, because I do think in some regard he's been treated unfairly by the court system.
Yes,
Uh,
for sure.
but it doesn't really matter. The other thing, let me say, like Kamala sucks. One thing that was happened recently that I laughed at, it's awful, but I laughed at, was that Tulsi Gabbard got put on a terrorism watch list
Oh my
from the Biden
gosh.
admin. She's like a
Jeez.
flight, like not a flight risk, but I guess she is a flight risk. Like they have her on a flight watch list that I believe that they also used to put Proud Boys and Jan 6 people on. And this is funny because Tulsi Gabbard is obviously, as you mentioned before, the person that sort of temporarily derailed Kamala Harris's political aspirations.
Yeah. So it's clearly just Kamala trying to get back at Tulsi. Like,
Absolutely.
obvious.
I believe that.
Yeah,
So
of course it is.
that sucks and that's pretty authoritarian. But
Yes.
once again, this is all on such a scale. I
Right.
don't see Trump that if you go, oh, that's awful that Kamala did that. She shouldn't be president for doing that. I want you to sit down and ask yourself, is Trump above doing that?
No,
All right,
absolutely
so
not.
we're gonna move on to a guy who also had his political aspirations derailed.
Mm,
Man by the
Ron
name of Ron Too Short DeSantis.
DeSanctimonious.
Tell me,
DeSanctimonious.
I'm gonna swirl this thing around, and then you can tell me where you kind of want him to be.
I mean, you're going really fast. I would say he's more
I'm
right
also
than
keeping it.
Trump, and
I
equally,
think
I think he's equally authoritarian to Vance. Maybe,
so.
maybe less, maybe a little less.
He's been pretty. Once again, it's hard because look at pot like, so DeSantis being the governor has had a lot more control as opposed to JD Vance just being a congressman. But they seem to share similar ideas about critical race theory, about the inclusion of religion in the federal government or even the state government. Like, I feel like if JD Vance was the governor of Florida or the governor of Ohio, he would make or try to make similar decisions in regards to stuff like critical race theory, gender studies, and he probably would have been pretty similar about COVID. Should we actually give DeSantis a bit of credit for COVID and move him down a bit?
Yeah, good point.
Even
Good
though
point.
I think he's burned all of that goodwill from COVID by immediately enacting a bunch of strict social policy.
Yep.
I still think it makes him lower than Vance. We'll
Yeah,
put
but
him.
still above Trump. So kind of thread the needle there.
It's a yeah. These they're not true to size. These
Yeah,
guys.
yeah. Use their you can use their mouths as reference, I guess. Like the
What you
smile.
believe. Yeah,
Yeah,
this is more of a thought exercise than it is
yeah.
a. This
I
isn't
think that's an
this isn't
appropriate
being
placement.
published as a political science paper for sure.
Yeah, I think Vance is more right than Vance. Or excuse me, I think DeSantis is more right than Vance. But I think this is a well placement. I think I also think DeSantis and Vance could be best friends. I mean, they in the sense that they would both get together to hang out and then they would both get bored with each other. But the truth is they're just boring people themselves. So like
Do you think that DeSantis had the opportunity to overthrow Trump as the nominee and that he misplayed his agency and he played his hand too poorly? Or do you think that even if he had played things perfectly following COVID, that he wouldn't have had the momentum to overtake Trump?
the second one, the latter. Vance made
Okay.
a huge mistake. That
Not
mistake,
Vance, DeSantis,
DeSantis, oh my gosh, you see in my mind they're like the same
the
person.
same person.
Yeah. DeSantis made a huge mistake, and that mistake was he went for the throat, like he went for the king. And when you go for the king, you can't miss. So what DeSantis should have done was he should have waited until next election. He would have undoubtedly become the nominee, and then he'd go up against Gavin Newsom. That's what he should have done. But instead, he got impatient for whatever reason, got super cocky, kind of aggressive against Trump and the Republican, the Trumpers essentially, the MAGA movement loved DeSantis, but now they despise him. He made a huge mistake, huge political miscalculation. He clearly has not read the 48 Laws of Power. Massive rookie mistake.
He also just he leaned so much into the cultural wasteland wars
Mm-hmm.
that our political system has devolved into. And I mean, we'll get to it. It's funny because he and Gavin Newsom, in some ways, are two sides of the same coin as these governors who have great opportunity and agency and are also the leaders of states that in a lot of ways represent the greater parties socially, politically, economically, and then be probably to retain that position or to get that position, they end up having to go far off the cliff of what's acceptable if you're going to try to be president to retain their states, if that makes sense.
That makes perfect sense. Yeah,
Awesome.
I mean, yeah, I mean, no, that was a good argument. I mean, look, what? Okay, now let's start with this. What does the future have in store for DeSantis?
I don't think
Senate.
he'll ever be able to recover from the social policy
I think he'd
because
win. I think he'd win as a senator for his state.
yes, I don't think he can ever leave Florida though.
Nope, he can't. Nope,
And
you're
I
right.
think the other thing is if he were to become actually, let's say this. I think he could become the Republican nominee for president, but that would be more evidence of the Republican Party's stupidity and
Lack of
ignorance
leadership.
to what people want. And it would
Mm.
result in him to, like, if he went head to head with Newsom, I think he would lose, but it would be interesting. I guess that's possible, right? To see them go
Newsom
head to head.
would beat DeSantis.
But wouldn't this be so emblematic of the parties and the failure of our primary system to put people in positions that are actually too extreme, and
Hmm.
then we would have to see that come to a head? I like
Yeah,
would this be good as a way to break the parties? I feel like it would be the kind of thing where because DeSantis is probably more right than Newsom is left, right?
yep, agreed. Oh yeah, for
And
sure, for sure.
that
I
would
think.
cause him to lose.
I mean, given wait, is
And by right,
are
I
we, are
mean
we, are we
both
not doing this
economically.
next?
Here, let me move. I'll make sure he's next.
Yeah, because Newsom, I think this would be a great
Where's
way to
that
say.
bugger?
I think Newsom goes right between Kamala and Waltz, right between the two.
And where do you think? Okay, he's between them. Do you think he's the same level of authoritarian, or do you think he's more or less?
I think he's the same. I think he's the same level.
Really?
I think he's a standard Democrat, and a standard Democrat has a standard what's the word I'm looking for? Baseline level of authoritarianism.
You don't think he's more authoritarian because of the COVID stuff? Because he's more authoritarian than Walls on that regard. But then I guess it's so complicated. This is what makes this a difficult
Yeah,
task.
this is tough.
Let's
Sure. I
even
mean, put him like an inch above. I mean, I'm not really gonna argue this point. I think it's kind of
I'll put him
minutia.
above by a little. Yeah, I agree. This is the kind of thing where it's like, could I talk
Yeah.
for an hour about Gavin Newsom's policies? I mean, I would
No,
probably have
because
to read for 2 hours to do it. And
yeah.
that's a failing on
Ultimately,
our part.
yeah, I think Gavin, he's definitely in between on economics. I think that's obvious.
Yes, because he has some stuff that's more economic left than Walls, and then stuff that's more economic right, because he does have to cater to the business of California.
Which
And I
is a good
don't
thing.
think he's as communist as right wingers would say. And I think communist is like the Nazi of Republicans, where that
Mm.
word has really lost its meaning.
I also really get annoyed when Republicans say that Nazis are actually leftists. Like, come on, bro. Please
Yeah, that's
stop.
such a that's like
Yeah.
calling North Korea a democratic republic because it's in the name.
Right. Or they'll be like, oh, well, it's the National Socialist Party. It's like, yeah, but that's just the name. Like, look
Or
at the
or when
policy.
they're like, look at who did slavery. I love that when they're like,
Oh,
the
it's so
Democrats were the
bad.
ones who enslaved
It's such a
everyone.
bad argument. Oh my God.
Well, it's like there's a great so the show 30 Rock. We're gonna do a little pop culture reference here. The show 30 Rock. It's very left leaning and it skewers Republican politics a lot, but it is very funny. And there's an episode that talks about Abraham Lincoln for a moment, and it talks about him being the face of the Republican Party, and then somebody stands up and goes, well, but the entire point of Abraham Lincoln's policy was was reacting to states' rights and being in favor of federal powers over states' rights, which goes against the entire message of the Republican Party today. And then he gets kind of shut up, like he gets kind of
Mm.
shushed. And while I mean nobody at the federal level actually cares about, I mean they care about states' rights a little bit. It is true that Democrats used to be the ones who were pushing states' rights policies in the 1800s
Mm.
through and then the Republicans have always been big business, but they used to be big business through federal legislation and through federal control.
Yes, that's right.
And they used to believe so like if you look at what, the whole Civil War was about slavery, but
Hmm.
the idea went through how the Democrats thought that their states' rights gave them the right to put in slavery. So obviously it means it's about slavery. But Lincoln and a lot of Republicans were not only against states' rights in regards to slavery, but a number of other issues.
Yep.
So it is a weird, like,
The
I don't
banks.
agree with the whole idea of the party swap because if you look at the alignment with business and the alignment with economic policy, it's, I believe, remained somewhat
Kind of somewhat,
constant.
yeah. I mean, it's better to
The
just say
social
that it was
policy
just,
has changed.
yeah, I mean, it's probably just more accurate to say that it was just a realignment, not that the parties
Yes,
actually swapped in
I
general.
agree.
Yeah.
That's a much better way of putting it, Nick. Good job by you.
Okay, yeah. Thank you. Bolsonaro, this guy is obviously on the right. He's obviously authoritarian. I mean, unfortunately, it's kind of sad to look at the state of affairs, but this top right corner is getting pretty crowded. You know, like,
Okay, and if we were doing this for real, if we were doing this on a much broader scale and made it much less relative, all of these guys would be in here. Like
mhm,
all of
yeah,
them. It may Walls might be, he might be, but not even. That's the thing. Well, I
yeah.
think
I
Walls
mean,
would be the closest to actually escaping uh
well,
right
yeah. What's the
economics, but he
term?
still might not even make it.
Yeah, there's something called it's a window. Oh, what's the term, bro? Something window.
A window?
It's a political term. It's like something window. The window of discussion. What's politically acceptable to discuss.
I don't know.
Oh, it's so annoying. Everyone listening is telling you what it's called, but I just totally forget.
Don't care. No, I care.
All I'm trying to say is the window for palatable views in the United States are all economic right. You know, so like even Waltz on an international scale would not be left. He's still
Yes.
economic right, which is adding on to what you said. I'm just annoyed that I forget the term. That's really gonna bother me. Either way, Bolsonaro is economic right, but not that much. He's in Brazil. He wants to crack down on welfare programs. I feel like I know more about Bolsonaro than I should because of a close friend of mine.
Hmm.
Um,
Okay, you definitely know more about him than me. So talk
okay,
about him and talk about his policies. I have an
sure,
understanding of him. I'm sure our listeners do, but maybe elaborate on that
sure. So
so we can place
Bolsonaro
him.
is a white Brazilian. So in Brazil, it's a very racist country. They have a lot of racial tensions, and a lot of black people in Brazil live in the northeast of the country. So the northeast of the country votes left, and they vote for heavy welfare programs, whereas pretty much every other part of the country votes conservative, except that, as you would expect, so it's kind of similar to the United States. The northeast is like heavily populated and dense, and they have like favelas, if you've ever heard of those.
Hmm.
So, you know, those areas vote very left. Bolsonaro came into office kind of like with a Trump personality, a Trump swagger, and a Trumpian disregard for the law. I would still say that he is less economic right than Trump. He wanted to crack down and eliminate some government agencies and eliminate some welfare, but in power, he didn't really get much of that done because I think personally it was mostly rhetoric. However, some would probably just say he was stalled by their Congress. He is economic right. He's left of Trump, and he is basically equal in authoritarianism. I think you've got him in the perfect spot right there. So
Okay,
it sounds like my
so
description was good.
would you consider him? I mean, looking at Brazil and looking at, it's like Trump had January 6th. Did
Yeah, they had
Bolsonaro have
something like that.
Bolsonaro kind of had something like that, right?
He
Because
did. He did.
I
His
would argue
followers.
he actually had a. I mean, I
Mhm.
guess it's hard to say. Is that on his followers? Is that on him? Same discussion we have with Trump. Do you have an answer to that kind of question?
I think that for Bolsonaro, it is more clearly on his followers. Whereas with Trump, it is more ambiguous, leaning towards on Trump's. The thing about Trump is like, you know, he kind of said like we will fight or whatever he said, like we'll be strong. But it's so like, you know, we've all heard that rally before, just before it happens. And then after when January 6th was happening, he was silent on the internet. He didn't really post anything. He didn't tell people to stop. Bolsonaro, it's much easier to say, oh, it was just his followers. Like he had less involvement.
Okay,
That's I hope that answered the question.
I'm pretty ambivalent on it, frankly,
Fair enough.
which
I
I
think
guess is
Bolsonaro's in a good spot here, though.
a failing for a guy who's doing
I mean,
this
Brazil is
exercise. Oh well.
all of Latin America is just very economically left. So, like for example, just a moment ago we said that in
Yeah,
the United
he's
States,
considered very economically right in South Central and South America,
exactly. So in the
but
United
relative to the
States,
rest of these people, no.
there you go. So in the US, Waltz is considered left, but internationally he's right. But in Brazil, Bolsonaro is considered right, but like internationally he's left. So by that, like if so you could even make the argument that Bolsonaro should be further left than Waltz.
Mm, you
But
could.
but I think it's fine here because of like
Okay.
rhetoric based and also like trying to put him in the perspective of how his view of how Brazilians view him. Hopefully that makes sense. Like we're trying to
Yeah.
find a middle ground
We're
there.
not, I guess, when we get to these international people, it's hard to put it on the American scale. We have to make some
Well, that's the thing,
distinctions.
man. Netanyahu, who's next, I know exactly where he goes. So
I want you. Yeah, I was about to say, what in the world are we gonna do with BB?
BB is the arch villain of Earth right now.
So
So
he's not here. We shouldn't put him in left down.
no, no, absolutely not. BB is very top right. In fact, he just breaks the scale. You could just drag him off the screen all the way
Okay,
top right. Yeah,
I'll
for
put him
sure.
here. Well,
Yeah,
okay. So you think his economic policy follows that?
dude, look at their economy. They don't really have a lot of regulation. They have a
Yeah.
lot of protections for. I mean, like for example, I forget the name of it, but it's like if you study Hebrew scripture, I forget the name. Matt, if you're listening to this, you probably know it. Basically, it's like people who are like
This
Jewish
podcast really is
students.
missing a Jew.
We should add one to the cast. Yeah, Cody, Cody would definitely know the name as well. Either way, it's like if you study like Hebrew scripture, you don't pay taxes, and like you get
Like,
government assistance. Yeah, did you know that?
yeah, yeah. These guys don't like work,
They don't work.
but that's
They
not
have like
economic right. That's economic left, isn't it?
no, I consider it like religious
It's
protection.
welfare. Oh, I guess, but
No,
that's
well,
isn't that more social policy?
no, here's the
Because
thing, bro.
okay,
It's not, this ideology is not nested in a welfare state. It's nested in a religious Zionist state.
but
So
wouldn't
the
you argue
welfare
that okay,
is a
yeah,
product of religious, yeah, the welfare is nested in protection of is nested in religious reasons. Therefore, it's economic right, in my opinion.
okay. I don't know if I
So
fully agree, but I don't care. Like once again, this is a thought exercise and a way to get us to talk. I'm fine with putting him here anyway,
yeah,
even if I
I
don't
would consider
necessarily
myself a
agree.
pretty open-minded person, but on this, like, my mind is closed.
This is what
Like
gets into the
BB is.
discussion about the failings of this plot because
Mm.
it's a social and socioeconomics. This policy is intertwined. The scales are connected.
Well, also, I think I should
So then
take
the
a moment
debate,
to discuss Israel for our
sure,
viewers who don't
yeah,
really
we
know as
should
well.
talk about Israel. I mean, because we essentially talk about is when when referring to Israel is about their
War.
war. Now,
Right.
one thing I was in Israel
Hmm.
at the very beginning of August, and
Cool.
there were protests going on, and it was not about Gaza. It
Mm.
was about Netanyahu as an authoritarian figure, because Netanyahu as the prime minister, I believe this is his third term, fourth term. He had
Dude,
non
he's been in
consecutive.
government forever.
Well, he's had non-consecutive terms,
Hmm.
and so he was essentially being investigated and almost, I don't know if I should use the word impeach because I forget, that's not the term because he's a prime minister, not a president.
Yeah, he'd get kicked out of
Impeach
the
being a very
Knesset.
American term, but they were investigating him because he was attempting to essentially steal power away from their court and
Hmm.
consolidate it into his executive power structure.
Yep.
And he was reaching a peak of unpopularity and of disapproval within Israel. And people were very upset and they wanted new leadership and they like were talking about bringing charges against him
Hmm.
and how quickly things change.
Yeah, and then the war happened, and now he
People want
knows
to
that
bring charges against him for different reasons.
exactly. Well, because once the war ends, he's done. I mean, it's kind of like Churchill, but the opposite. Like Churchill was cast out by his nation, and he was a
Churchill was a
successful.
wartime president,
Right. He was, and Abe Lincoln was too. Um,
Yeah.
but I mean, Abe would have been reelected. He's got assassinated. But like Churchill was cast out after the war because even before the war, he was viewed as an outcast and as a belligerent. Netanyahu is the war is the only thing keeping him in power,
And it's
whereas
probably going to take him
Churchill,
out of power eventually.
right? But like what I'm trying to say is Churchill only gained power because of the war, Netanyahu is only keeping power because of the war.
I agree.
Right. Netanyahu's the worst. Like he's actually the worst. He's the supervillain of Earth.
Yeah,
I think
he's awful. I don't think he has any moral defense of his actions. I think he's
he
deranged.
just
I think
sucks.
he's racist. I think
Yeah.
if you have complaints about America's economy, and I'm not saying the Jews are controlling the economy, I'm saying in this instance that the amount of money that we're sending to Israel to conduct their war, as somebody who, as we showed on my scale, goes down towards libertarian, I think it's problematic for us to have so much financial support in this endeavor.
Okay, yeah,
But
and here's also I'm gonna say.
beyond that, speak on it.
I'm gonna say this as someone who enjoys the American Empire. It absolutely frustrates me to no end that Israel's war, e- economy, and society at large could not even exist without the backing of the United States. Israel is an American colony. That's what they are, even more than Japan. But the fact that this colony of ours is misbehaving, uh, doing drone strikes without permission, and then
Trying to
asking,
goad us into a war with Iran.
trying to goad us into war with Iran, trying to get us to send them valuable military supplies that put our own security at risk, disrespecting us on the world stage, lying to us, making us a pariah because we have to defend their actions. It's like a parent whose kid is a piece of shit. So
They
like
gotta stand up for him though, I
but the
guess.
parent still has to defend their piece of shit kid. That's like us with Israel. It really upsets me. Like Israel is the worst. I absolutely despise them because not only of their actions, but frankly, because they disrespect us as a nation. I can't even like if I was the president and I saw all the things Israel was doing without asking us for permission and basically goading us into continuously supporting them, I'd be fucking furious. I would cut all funding. I'd be like, you know what? Fuck you. You're gonna get invaded. You don't like it's ridiculous. It's actually ridiculous.
Yeah,
I
it's
despise it. They
me
spy on
too.
us, bro. They launched malware against the United States. They have a malware program called Pegasus. They
Yep,
launched it
I'm aware.
against our own government. How?
They
Could you
also they
imagine?
also influence they also influence like through APAC, the
Our
Israeli government. And
elections
once again, I'm
with
being very
APAC.
clear here. I'm not saying Jews are doing this. I'm
It's
saying
the
it's the
government of
Israeli
Israel.
government.
Yeah, I'm the same. I'm
Uh,
the same.
through
Absolutely.
APAC and also through I believe there was a social media campaign that I believe might have that utilized the Pegasus stuff after October 7th that was meant to abuse the what's it called? The algorithms of politicians.
Yep, they're the worst.
Crazy stuff.
Jackson was telling me that in the same way China is really annoyed by North Korea, we are really annoyed by Israel. Like I think the relationship between China and North Korea is very similar to us and Israel. Very similar relationship. And for that reason, I do, like, and by that parallel, like, it's very obvious. Like, it's just very easy for me to dislike Israel. I just, as a nation state, like, they're just the worst. I mean, really. Why can't we just look? If the people of Israel are so concerned about like having a state of their own, why can't we just import a bunch of them to like New York, where they already live?
That's already happened.
Right. Why can't we just do
Well,
that? This way we don't have to get embroiled in this war on the other side of the world. It's ridiculous.
I mean, we also should be the operate. A lot of stuff comes out about how Netanyahu is single-handedly trying to stop peace negotiations. A lot of that's coming out from his military advisors, who I also believe that they're saying these things because they're trying to get the heat off them.
Mm.
They're trying to consolidate the blame onto Netanyahu. I do think I don't believe in a one-state solution for either group. Like, I don't think you can get rid of the state of Israel. There are people who have made their lives there. Like from a perspective of pragmatism, you need a two-state solution.
You see that? Okay, you know what? I might have to disagree here, and I hate to
Really,
disagree. I was eating hibachi once with my friends at High Point. It was like the last time we were all together at a table. I had already graduated, actually. I was just back for the weekend. And I had this really bright guy sitting next to me, absolutely brilliant guy. And he says to me that this war between the Palestinians and the Jews has gone on for like hundreds or what, 1,000 years. He said to me that we just got to let it run its course so one side definitively wins.
I mean, I get that. I think That's the
They
even
can
more
never live in
practical
harmony.
answer. Oh, I agree. I think that's unlikely. And it sucks and it's awful and it has to do with meddling from other states and it has to do with a very long and complicated
Whoa,
history.
slow down, slow down. It also has to do with the views of the population. What was that poll? It was like 70% of Palestinians support Gaza. Like, no, Hamas or something. It was some crazy number, bro. It was absolutely insane. And then when the invasion started, when Israel invaded Gaza, and the citizens of Israel found out the torture and the killing and the war crimes, it was like, this is a legitimate number. It was like only 5% of the Israeli population thought the Israeli military was too extreme. Like, that is crazy, bro. They just had, I'm going to say something else. They just had some prisoners. So, the Israeli government locked up, I think it was like 5 or 6 Israeli soldiers who were found guilty of torturing Palestinian prisoners. Okay. The
Mm-hmm.
people of Israel staged a riot, broke into the prison to free the Israeli soldiers. That is unreal. Could you imagine Americans breaking into a prison camp to free other Americans who tortured Iraqis? Like,
Yeah,
that'd be insane.
I could imagine it.
I actually can't imagine that. I don't think Americans would do that. Maybe that might be my American exceptionalism, but fuck it. Even if it is, like, that just shows you how extreme the Israeli population is. They broke into a
Actually,
prison to
I agree. It's
free their
crazy.
own
It's
war crime perpetuators. It's
and here's the thing.
insane.
I with I think the Palestinians would probably do the same thing, right? We can agree on
Well,
that.
that's right. They would. That's my point. They're two
Yeah.
extreme. Both of them are. Both populations are extremist. Both governments are extremist. But the governments are not to blame here. I mean, like, yeah, no, what I'm trying to say is the governments are a byproduct of the citizens. Like, often in America, we say, and I actually feel this way. I think that in the United States, our government is not a byproduct of our people. I think that our people on the left and the right have different views than the people who lead us. But in
Mm-hmm.
Israel and in Gaza, I think the opposite is true. I think that the governments perfectly resemble the citizenry.
I think that's wrong. I think it's the
Really.
same thing where if you look at it's the same way that people look at America and
Mm.
because we're a democracy, they're like, "Well, you guys believe this stuff because these are the people you elect." I think a lot of people in Israel are very unhappy and I think they're unhappy. It's like the thing you talk about, whereas even when
Sure.
you're unhappy with the government, you're still like, I got to ride with it though, because that's the only option, and that's the pragmatic option. So, like, if you look at Palestinians supporting Hamas, it is kind of the practical option, even if it's not a good one.
Okay,
Are you
so you
there,
think
Nick?
that me pointing
Yeah,
to that one poll isn't enough data for me to say that the population's extreme?
I think probably
Fair enough.
not. I don't. I'm distrusting of polls in general. I do understand where you're coming from. I just think we probably have an incomplete view on it, the same way that people might make the same incomplete assertions on the United States.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. No, no, no. You're right. You're
But I
right.
do
Our view
agree
is
that
definitely
both these countries, or Palestine, are more extreme than the United States with these views. I'm saying I don't even like when I talk about a two-state solution. I'm like, I don't even know if it's gonna work. But I feel like we got to try, and maybe we don't. And maybe America should just wash their hands like, uh, geez, how am I forgetting his name? Oh, I'm such a bad Catholic.
hmm. Give me
Pontius
context. Maybe
Pilate.
I'm
Sorry, it
oh
took me a
okay.
second.
Wow, that is yeah, you gotta step up as a
To
Catholic there.
get
You gotta know that
biblical,
name.
America. I feel like the United States is very big Pontius Pilate energy.
Yeah, we should step out totally. Yeah, we should wash our hands of this for sure. I mean, look, at the end of the day, we should just let them fight it out, but we shouldn't get involved and we should stop
But it's
giving our
too late
weapons.
because we've influenced it too much.
But yeah, you're right. You're right. No, it's now at this point, it's a demon of our
So
creating.
I
You're
guess we
absolutely
could
right.
pull like an Afghanistan and just leave and then watch horrible shit happen, which maybe I'm not entirely I don't want to say, "Oh, I'm in favor of horrible shit happening." I think the problem is that if that should have been done, Nick, it should have been done 80 years ago. It's too late
Yeah,
now.
it's been too long, and sadly, the United States has made a huge misstep because it's hurt our relationships with Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Oman, all these other countries that we care about, the UAE, all these other countries that we're trying to influence in the Middle East. we've thrown all that away just to protect like a rebellious child. It's
And
so unfortunate.
they hate us for different reasons, but I agree that this has hurt significantly the
Hurt,
chance
yeah,
for growth.
of course it does. Yeah. So I
And
think on that note,
yeah.
we should end this political compass discussion.
All right.
Netanyahu's the worst.
Well, I think the last thing we should do
Yeah.
is I am going to new share. I can do this. I can do this. I'm going to go
Got it.
back to Google. And here's what we're going to do. I'll show you what the political compass puts for the 20. You can see my screen, right?
Yep. Yep. We got it.
Here's what we got. And this also includes Jill Stein, Cornel West. These people don't matter. Chase Oliver does
Yeah,
not
they don't matter.
matter. But look,
I like how notice how the people that don't matter are the only libertarians.
oh, of course. I mean, yeah, because that's not popular policy. Or even if it is
Hmm.
popular policy, you can't, once again, you can't get into office as the president. You would have to not do anything.
Yeah, yeah, that's
It's
fair.
like these people who want to get into office, even though Kamala doesn't have policy, like they actually do want to do things.
Oh, this is interesting. I haven't looked at this before. Um, Waltz and Harris are they're on the right as we discussed.
Yeah,
So
they would be, as Sophia said, because this is not a relative poll. This is an absolute one, or this is not
right.
a relative compass. This is an absolute one. So let's identify the differences. Functionally speaking, I think we actually got it pretty similar.
Yep, we did.
The major difference being, because like you could move, the major difference is that they actually put Trump as more economic right than Vance, and they put them on the same level of authoritarianism, which I disagree with.
I disagree with that. That's yeah, Trump should be left and down.
Yeah, not by much,
Not by
but
much.
still. So
Yep.
like when this is their notion. I'm not going to read this all for you, but something they do talk about is talking about the people who support him, and I think it's kind of lame. Uh, like Trump's contempt for like it would be fueled by pathological retribution for the people and institutions responsible. Maybe, like I don't know. I guess it's fair, and I guess he's made those types of comments, but it's hard to even look at Trump's rhetoric and to say that this means anything. And they're like, how can so many who have chosen Jesus as their savior opt for such a man as their candidate? This is obviously these guys are not American. Like, you
Yeah.
know,
Mm,
uh,
yeah.
this stuff is very funny, and you could take this apart pretty easily. Where it's like, okay, it's pretty easy to understand why Christians would be against abortion. It's pretty
Hmm.
understand why the Christians would be homophobic, misogynistic, and anti-immigration. Evangelical Christians, and then the gun rights, and then stuff like this. Uh, it's I don't know. I don't think Trump's base actually. He doesn't actually play to his base as much as people think. Would you
No, he
agree?
doesn't. No, well, because here's the thing. Trump's Trump's base, they follow his personality. So whatever he says, they will support, which is kind of cool. Like there's great power in that. So
All right, and so I think that's kind of it. We planned on talking a bit more, but we talked a lot.
yeah,
Uh,
it's been a while.
and so this pod will be made public along with some of the other ones. And we don't have a set topic for the next time we talk. We're trying to get
No,
these
no.
out.
Yeah, well, we'll figure it out because what's going to happen is people are going to give us their mailbag, right? And
Correct.
they'll
And
have
I
an idea.
want people
Yeah.
reach out to Nick, respond in the comments. We want a lot
Yeah.
of stuff to talk about. Because like if you guys want, you guys can drive the train. And that'd be awesome. If you guys control the discussion, it's up to you. If we only get a few questions and they're bad questions, we're gonna have to do something else. But I trust you guys. You guys are smart people, and you have interesting ideas. And I'd love to clash against them or agree to them or come to terms with them. I think it's really exciting. So I hope people ask a lot of questions that we can talk about.
Yeah, I
And I
mean,
think we're gonna close on that, Nick. If you have, you should say your last piece.
yeah. So, I mean, just in comparison to the friend group, or I guess in comparison to the people who view, you and I are left of most of the viewers. So, I mean, I always get, some heated comments or like on the phone or whatever. So I know we're going to get some more of those. Either way, I really
Bring the
appreciate
heat.
you guys. Yeah, bring the heat, I guess. Yeah. So thank you guys for watching today. Hope you enjoyed. And this has been No Good News. Bye, guys.
Bye bye.